Imagine a world that's just. It's reduced to white noise and pain. You are trapped in a dark, frozen hole months after the battle that should have ended your life. You've been surviving on smoke and scraps, and the cultural certainty you hold is that when the enemy finally finds you, they will inflict a death so cruel it will shatter your spirit long before your body fails.
And then they arrive.
Yes, they arrive armed, terrifying, the absolute embodiment of everything you've been taught to hate, but instead of raising their weapons, they offer rescue.
But not an easy rescue. They demand you walk with them. 8 miles.
8 miles through a roaring Alaskan blizzard that is already tearing the entire landscape apart.
That decision to accept life from the very enemy you were taught to despise, or to choose the honor of a final solitary death, that is the impossible choice at the heart of this deep dive.
It really is.
This isn't just another forgotten tale of survival from the Pacific Theater. It's a profound exploration of human resilience, where duty, propaganda, hatred, and just simple human mercy all collide under the most extreme duress you can possibly imagine.
And the source material that you, our listeners, brought to us, it reveals a moment of forgotten history that truly challenges everything we think we know about the line between combat and compassion.
It really does.
You are listening to Hidden Front History, where we take a deep dive into the sources you bring us to uncover the forgotten moments of history that challenge everything we think we know.
Our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the extraordinary incident that occurred in February 1944 on the remote, godforsaken island of Attu.
Which is part of the Aleutian chain in Alaska.
Exactly. And we're focusing on the story of 15 Imperial Japanese Army nurses who were isolated and forgotten, and the 4 American soldiers who risked their lives and defied every single operational protocol to save them.
Okay, so let's unpack this incredible confluence of factors, because we have to start with the setting itself. Before we even get to the soldiers or the nurses, we have to talk about Attu. I mean, this was one of the few pieces of American soil actually occupied by the Japanese during the war.
It was.
And the fighting there was just legendary in its brutality.
Precisely. Attu was strategically just so significant because of its location in the Aleutian chain.
It's the northernmost and westernmost point of U.S. territory.
That's it. So its capture by the Japanese was this massive psychological blow to the U.S. And the subsequent American battle to reclaim it in May of 1943 was, well, it was horrific.
One of the bloodiest in the Pacific.
Absolutely. Primarily because the Japanese forces fought nearly to the last man. It culminated in that infamous Banzai charge that ended the major conflict on the island.
So the place itself was just soaked in violence and death long before our specific story even begins. But as you noted, the true constant enemy on Attu wasn't just the opposing army. It was the climate.
The climate was a character in this story. It was an active antagonist.
Can you describe the conditions? I mean, what defined life and death there?
Well, the environment was just designed to kill. We are talking about conditions where the average winter temperature was well below freezing, and that was routinely coupled with gale force winds.
So the wind chill factor must have been insane.
Insane. It often plunged the effective temperature to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If you exposed bare skin for more than a few minutes, you were looking at third-degree frostbite.
And the winds themselves?
The winds could reach 70, sometimes 80 miles per hour. That's powerful enough to literally knock a full-grown man off his feet and send him tumbling down an icy slope. It was just relentless.
And then there was the fog. You mentioned the fog wasn't just a nuisance. It was like a psychological weapon.
Absolutely. The fog on Attu was dense, disorienting, and it came on with no warning. It could descend in minutes, reducing visibility to absolute zero.
Like you can't see your own hand in front of your face.
Yeah, literally. Soldiers on both sides often suffered from this form of disorientation called whiteout. It led to men just walking right off cliffs or getting instantly lost, even if they were just a few hundred yards from their posts.
No.
It was a frozen wasteland where just moving was a battle, and the wind never, ever stopped screaming.
And it's into this hellish landscape that these 15 women were assigned. They were volunteer nurses from the Imperial Japanese Army Nurse Corps.
Volunteers, answering a patriotic call.
Yeah.
They were undertaking what must have been one of the most perilous assignments of the entire war.
And that context of patriotism and honor, that's really vital to understanding their mindset later on, isn't it?
It's everything. They had volunteered out of this deep sense of duty to the emperor and to their country. You'd probably imagine supporting their troops in clean, organized field hospitals.
Sure.
Instead, they found themselves in these crude, underground bunkers, essentially just reinforced caves
Yeah.
that offered almost no shelter from the biting damp, the cold, or the incessant smoke from their own tiny fires.
So their medical role was completely defined by this misery. This wasn't routine care. They were managing the absolute worst of battlefield injuries under the worst possible conditions.
Their daily routine was grueling. It was focused entirely on preserving life under impossible circumstances. They were treating severe frostbite, which often led to gangrene that required field amputations,
Wow.
and fighting infections that just thrived in that cold, damp environment. They were constantly exhausted. But the mental battle was arguably even harder than the physical one.
Because culturally, their training carried a very specific mandate about what to do if captured.
That's the core of their trauma. They were operating under the deepest possible sense of duty and honor, as defined by wartime propaganda. They were taught explicitly that surrender was a betrayal. It was a dishonor to their families, to their ancestors, and to the emperor.
And capture itself wasn't seen as, well, it wasn't seen as a survivable outcome.
Not at all. They believed capture didn't mean a quick end. It meant a slow, cruel death, designed specifically to extract military secrets and break the spirit before the body gave out. The sources are crystal clear on this. Suicide was not just an option. It was the expected and honorable course of action upon defeat.
Death before dishonor.
That was the code. So when the American assault came in May 1943 and the final Banzai charge was ordered, the Japanese command simultaneously ordered the nurses to take their own lives.
But something went wrong with that order.
The chaos of the battle was total. Communication just collapsed instantly under the American bombardment. Officers were killed where they stood. And in the ensuing disorganization, those 15 women found themselves in this hidden bunker complex that was simply overlooked.
Overlooked during the final American sweep and cleanup.
Exactly. They couldn't carry out the self-termination orders because they were physically trapped and ultimately forgotten by their own retreating and dying forces. They were left in a state of purgatory.
And for months, from May 1943 until February 1944, that's nearly 9 months, they survived in this forgotten tomb. You described the extreme rationing. Let's delve into the logistical horror of that survival.
The specifics are just harrowing. They were living entirely on scraps the fleeing troops had left behind, supplementing their diet only with melted snow.
Which they had to melt themselves.
Right. And the sources detail they found a single damaged crate of rice cans. They had to divide one can among all 15 women and make it last for 3 days.
3 days.
Think about that level of starvation. We're talking a few grains of rice per person per day. That's just enough to keep you conscious, but not nearly enough to sustain life long term.
And the bunker itself, which was supposed to be a shelter, became this toxic environment because of their need for warmth and water.
Exactly. To melt the snow, they had to create these tiny, inefficient fires. They were using broken furniture, discarded medical boxes, even scraps of paper, anything combustible they could find.
And the bunker had no proper ventilation.
None. So the smoke had nowhere to go. It just filled the entire space, hanging in the air like a thick, acrid cloud. This smoke coated their throats, caused these deep, constant rattling coughs, and stained the inside of the bunker black. They were breathing smoke and damp air, which only made the frostbite and lung infections worse.
So to cope with the freezing conditions, the women huddled together constantly for physical warmth, but the psychological warmth that was maintained through memory and song.
That is the most humanizing detail in sources, I think. They would huddle together, whispering memories, trying to remember the warmth of the sun or the smells of home. And they sang.
What kind of songs?
They sang these soft, nostalgic melodies from their homeland. Songs about cherry blossoms in spring, the sound of rain on the roofs of their childhood homes, and the mothers who were waiting for them. The singing was a survival mechanism. It was a way to anchor themselves to a reality outside the immediate, brutal cold and to stave off the crushing weight of despair.
It's also crucial to remember how young many of them were.
Very young. Some sources indicate several were barely 18, just out of training. They left warm homes, expecting to serve with dignity, only to face this reality of starvation, smoke, and the constant fear of discovery. They were young women caught in a political and military nightmare, completely forgotten and entirely alone.
And that soft, lyrical singing contrasts so jarringly with the brutal reality of the American soldiers who were about to walk into their lives.
It sets the stage for this profound clash of cultures and, ultimately, of humanity that is about to occur.
So let's shift to that. By February 1944, the U.S. Army considered Attu secure.
Totally secure. The Japanese presence was thought to be zero, or maybe a handful of desperate, starving stragglers at most. The American patrol that found the nurses was essentially just a skeleton crew.
A cleanup crew, basically.
Right. Cleanup operations, weather station maintenance. It was miserable, routine work, and the men were deeply cynical about being there at all.
Tell us more about the patrol itself. These weren't frontline combat vets in that moment. They were, like you said, a cleanup crew. Let's introduce the 4 key men.
Okay, so first you have Corporal James Mitchell. He's 24, the patrol leader, an aspiring engineering student from Ohio. He was a man of logic, structure, planning, which we have to remember when he makes the most illogical decision of his life.
Okay.
Then there's Sergeant Davis from Alabama. He's the pragmatic, career soldier. He had seen action in North Africa, survived the desert heat, and he had zero tolerance for any risk that wasn't justified by a clear military gain.
And the 2 others kind of represent the moral extremes of the conflict.
They're absolutely vital. There's Private Chen, 32, a Chinese-American from San Francisco. His background is deeply complex. His family had suffered severely under the Japanese occupation of Shanghai.
So he carried a very personal, very justified hatred for the enemy.
An immense hatred. He was face to face with the very people who had caused his family such pain. And finally, you have Private Kowalski. He's the youngest, at 20. He was still green, still operating on that clear, simplistic worldview of military propaganda.
Good versus evil.
Exactly. American versus Japanese monster. His moral compass hadn't yet been complicated by the raw, gray realities of war.
So this cynical routine patrol is checking bunkers for demolition. They're expecting only frozen corpses and abandoned equipment. How did Mitchell discover the nurses?
It was a tiny detail that ended up saving 15 lives. Mitchell, the engineer, noticed these thin, almost invisible wisps of steam rising from cracks in the entrance of the 3rd bunker they checked.
Steam.
Steam. In that sub-zero environment, steam meant heat. Heat meant combustion. And combustion, against all odds, meant life. This immediately triggered every survival instinct they had.
And they knew the danger of holdouts.
Oh, absolutely. Just the month before, a small group of hidden Japanese soldiers had ambushed a patrol, killing 2 GIs. They were on high alert.
So what was the immediate reaction? Was it to throw grenades or open fire?
Under standard protocol, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They were trained to eliminate threats swiftly. Mitchell motioned for his men to take up firing positions. He approached cautiously, his finger on the trigger, and he shined his powerful flashlight beam inside.
And what did he see?
The beam cut through the smoke and the darkness, and what he saw instantly shattered all his preconceptions. Dozens of eyes stared back at him, but they lacked the aggressive, defiant glint of a soldier prepared to die.
There was something else.
He later wrote they were filled with terror and something more, hope, desperate and fragile.
And he yelled, "Don't shoot."
He did. Even though he had no idea if they understood English, that was the first conscious defiance of protocol, a gut reaction.
And then the figures started to emerge.
Slowly. Women. Thin, hollow-cheeked, wrapped in filthy rags and oversized military coats. Mitchell later recounted that the sight of their immense suffering, their bodies reduced to barely human status by starvation and cold, hit him harder than any direct combat injury he had ever seen. He realized instantly, these were victims, not combatants.
And then comes that singular, profound moment of clarity.
Yes. One woman stepped forward. This was Yuki. She was likely in her 30s, the oldest nurse, and her dignity had somehow remained intact despite her condition. She performed a formal, precise bow gesture that contrasted so absurdly with the filth and cold of the bunker.
And she spoke.
In halting, difficult English, she said, "We are nurses, please mercy."
That one word, mercy.
It changed the trajectory of all their lives. Mitchell lowered his rifle, but the tactical, immediate problem was just overwhelming.
A tactical disaster, really.
Absolutely. Mitchell quickly counted 15 women. Many were immobile, severely frostbitten, malnourished, and the weather was turning. That massive blizzard was visible on the horizon, this advancing wall of gray cloud. They knew they had maybe 2 hours, tops, before the storm just swallowed the island.
And the radio.
Chen immediately checked the patrol radio. It was dead. Killed by the cold or maybe just out of range, they were completely on their own.
So they are 8 miles from safety, with what amounts to 15 injured prisoners and a zero-visibility, life-threatening blizzard about to hit. The decision rests entirely on Corporal Mitchell.
And this is where the conflict between the military man and the human being is just laid bare. Sergeant Davis, the career soldier, voiced the standard, practical calculation that any commander would make.
Which was?
He basically said, we have 4 American lives here. We risked those 4 lives for 15 enemies who might not even make it anyway. The odds are bad. He was arguing for self-preservation and adherence to the military mission. Protect American personnel first.
And what was going through Private Chen's mind in that moment? The man whose personal experience justified his hatred.
You can only imagine the internal struggle. It must have been agonizing. Chen saw the women, and he was forced to reconcile the monster of Japanese occupation with the human suffering right in front of him. His immediate impulse might have been to walk away, to let the cold do what his training told him was right.
But he didn't.
No. The sight of them, starving women incapable of resistance, it pulled him back to his own fundamental humanity. He remained silent, just waiting for Mitchell's decision.
So Mitchell, the aspiring engineer, had to defy all logic.
He did. He looked at Davis, he looked at the women, and his moral compass just overrode his engineering training. He stated quietly but firmly, "They're not the enemy anymore. They're just people who need help. And if we leave them here to freeze, we're no better than the bastards who forgot them."
And that was it. The mission changed.
In that single moment, the mission changed from a demolition patrol to a rescue operation. The order was given, "We take them back to base now." It defied all protocol.
Did Sergeant Davis push back any further?
Davis was a soldier. He argued the logic, but once the order was given by his superior, he was in. He just nodded and said, "Then we move fast, Corporal." The impossible choice was made.
They would attempt to carry 15 freezing enemy nurses 8 miles through a coming blizzard, risking their own lives with every single step.
Once that commitment was made, the logistics immediately became a complete nightmare. They discovered the true devastating scope of the women's injury.
Right. It was worse than they thought.
Oh, much worse. The extent of the frostbite was crippling. 3 of the women were completely immobile. Their feet were black, the tissue just destroyed by third-degree frostbite. They were in agonizing pain and could not be persuaded to stand.
And the others?
5 others could only shuffle for short distances. Every step was a potential trip hazard and a source of intense agony. That left only 7 who could reasonably attempt the 8-mile trek on their own power.
So 4 American GIs had to figure out a way to carry or assist 11 injured women across 8 miles of rough, icy, mountainous terrain. How did they even begin to manage the physical impossibility of that task?
Ingenious improvisation. It was born of sheer necessity. They scavenged their surroundings for materials, they found scraps of old tent canvas, and they broke the stocks off abandoned Japanese rifles.
To make stretchers.
Exactly. They fashioned these crude stretchers, 2 rifles parallel, wrapped tightly in canvas. Because the women were so malnourished, they were incredibly light, which actually helped. It allowed 2 women to be loaded onto a single makeshift stretcher.
Then they split the load.
Mitchell and Davis took one, Chen and Kowalski took the other, rotating the women every few minutes.
And what about the 7 walking wounded?
Safety was paramount, especially because they were anticipating 0 visibility. They used all of their remaining rope to tie the 7 walking nurses together, creating a human chain.
A lifeline.
Literally. Yuki, the oldest and the strongest, took the lead position. She acted as the anchor and set the slow, grueling pace. Mitchell checked the bearing northwest, 8 miles. They estimated, with the terrain and the injured, 5 or 6 hours. But they didn't get that time.
Because the blizzard, that character of death on Attu, hit almost immediately.
It struck with brutal swiftness, only about 20 minutes into the march. Visibility dropped instantly to absolute 0. The world just became a roaring, howling, disorienting void of white noise.
And the snow.
It was blowing horizontally, stinging their exposed faces like glass shards. The temperature dropped again, drastically. Mitchell described feeling a layer of ice forming over his mustache and freezing his eyelids. This wasn't snow. It was granular ice designed to kill.
Mitchell was carrying the lead stretcher with Davis, but he also carried one of the walking wounded on his back for part of the way, didn't he?
That's correct. Even though the woman was small, maybe 90 pounds, the sheer weight combined with the resistance of that horizontal wind made it feel like twice that. Mitchell's physical exertion was phenomenal. He couldn't even hear Davis over the wind. He relied entirely on the tension of the rope connecting the human chain and his engineering instinct to keep the compass bearing despite the whiteout.
Every step was a battle.
Every single step was a battle against the elements, trying to drag them off course.
The physical and mental toll must have been immediate and crushing, especially for the American soldiers who were carrying the bulk of the weight.
Sergeant Davis, the seasoned veteran who had survived the intense heat of the Sahara, later recounted that he found the Alaskan cold worse.
Worse than the Sahara.
He said the desert heat kills you quickly. But the Attu cold felt like death, creeping slowly into your bones. Mitchell's hands and feet went numb rapidly, which jeopardized his ability to keep a grip on the canvas stretcher poles, which were quickly coated in ice.
And the other two.
Chen and Kowalski were forced to rotate the weight of the second stretcher even more frequently than they planned, sometimes every 5 or 6 minutes, just because their muscles were failing.
And the youngest, Kowalski, was the first to break. He was running purely on adrenaline and fear, and the physical reality of this impossible challenge finally just caught up to him.
He collapsed into the snow about 2 hours into the march. He was white-faced, blue-lipped, shaking uncontrollably, his vision blurring. He just gasped, "I can't do it. I'm done. Leave me." He was physically and psychologically spent.
He chose the easy, self-preserving option.
And this was the moment Mitchell had to step out of his role as a compassionate leader and become a necessary brute.
What did he do? How did he pull a man from the brink of hypothermia and surrender?
He turned, fighting the wind, and he refused to offer the sympathy Kowalski expected. Instead, he forced him up, shaking him hard, and used the sharpest tool he had, shame and responsibility.
What did he say?
He shouted into the wind that giving up meant dying, and that his girlfriend Mary would get a letter saying he died in the snow because he quit. It was brutal, but it was essential motivation. It didn't make Kowalski feel better. It sparked this primal anger and the will to survive, forcing the young man to grab the rope and just keep moving.
He was teaching him that our better nature is sometimes a forced choice.
Exactly, but the resilience of the nurses was equally phenomenal, particularly Yuki.
Right, her determination was a mirror image of Mitchell's leadership.
It really was. When one of the walking nurses, likely suffering from exhaustion and the onset of hypothermia, simply sat down in the snow with this blank look of surrender on her face, Yuki acted instantly.
What did she do?
She crouched beside her, spoke urgently, and when the woman didn't respond, Yuki delivered a sharp, decisive slap across her face. The shock cleared the fog of fatigue. Yuki then forced her back to her feet, speaking fiercely in Japanese, absolutely refusing to allow any surrender.
This shared will to survive, the physical exertion of the Americans, the moral fortitude of Yuki, was then underscored by the haunting sound of the nurses singing again.
Yes, even as they staggered forward, tied by this rope, buffeted by the storm, the nurses began singing a traditional, powerful Japanese melody of perseverance. Mitchell and the others couldn't understand the words, of course.
But they understood the meaning.
The sound, cutting faintly through the shriek of the wind, communicated one absolute message. We are still here. We are still alive. We will not surrender now. It was a silent pact between the rescuers and the rescued.
And then came the hardest choice of the entire march. The moment that defined Mitchell's moral character beyond any doubt.
Another woman collapsed. She was young, possibly 19, and unconscious. Her pulse was faint, but still detectable. Kowalski, still running on fumes, articulated the cold logic of survival.
He said they had to leave her.
He said, "We need to leave her, Corporal. We can't carry another. If we try to take her too, we all die. That's one life for 18. And logistically, he was absolutely correct. That was the military answer.
But Mitchell's response was not military.
No, it was purely human. He immediately refused. He stripped off his own pack, discarding precious extra ammunition, spare clothes, the remaining rations, the pack that might have saved his own life. And he hoisted the unconscious woman over his other shoulder in a fireman's carry.
So he was now carrying 2 people.
He was now carrying 2 women, roughly 170 pounds of dead weight, plus the weight of the stretcher, through a blizzard. It was an impossible, physically unsustainable act.
But he forced a rotation system to make the impossible possible.
That's the engineering mind returning to solve the unsolvable problem. They instituted this mandatory, brutal rotation. The unconscious woman was passed between the 4 soldiers every 10 minutes.
That sounds incredibly dangerous in a whiteout.
It was. You have 4 men, already at the point of collapse, having to use their remaining strength to lift and transfer dead weight, risking slipping on the ice and falling with every exchange. And Yuki stayed close, checking the pulse every single time the woman was transferred. Her nod, alive, still alive, became the single most important signal in their world, telling them their immense gamble was somehow still paying off.
Wow. The physical description of this march, the constant rotation, the sheer willpower against the elements, it just gives so much weight to the eventual outcome. It wasn't a quick rescue. It was a sustained act of impossible heroism.
And after nearly 6 hours of that agonizing progress, against all probability, they made it. Mitchell finally sighted the vague outline of the supply depot through the swirling snow, proving he had kept the exact bearing the entire time.
The entrance must have been dramatic.
It was absolute chaos. The base guard, a Private Thompson, nearly fired on them.
He didn't recognize them?
They looked like walking corpses emerging from the void. They were coated in rime ice, their faces were gaunt, staggering, barely recognizable as Americans, dragging this human chain of bundled rags behind them.
And immediate medical attention was, thankfully, available.
The nurses were rushed in for severe hypothermia, frostbite, and malnutrition. The medics, who were accustomed to treating battlefield injuries, were stunned by the severity of the cold injuries, coupled with months of starvation.
I can imagine.
The lead medic, a Sergeant Williams, noted that Yuki's core temperature was dangerously low. It was 89 degrees Fahrenheit. She was clinically dying. But when he was treating her, Yuki looked up and spoke those incredible words.
What did she say?
Death is easy. Living is hard. We choose hard. They had chosen the agonizing path of survival.
So the immediate logistical problem was solved, but now came the military flutout. Mitchell knew he had risked American lives for enemy prisoners, which is a potential court-martial offense, especially in the heat of a global conflict.
Precisely. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, arrived expecting protocol. He had 4 of his men, exhausted and injured, returning with 15 enemy personnel who were actively fighting the war against all orders and logic.
And Mitchell confessed immediately.
He did, expecting the worst.
Right.
Reprimand, investigation, probably reassignment, or even a court-martial.
But wait, Harrison was a career officer. He must have been obligated to follow procedure. How did he justify commending them instead? Wasn't that an outrageous violation of military doctrine?
That is the critical point that the source material really explores. Harrison looked at the women receiving treatment and Mitchell and his exhausted men, and he had this moment of profound realization. He said, that's exactly what you should have done. He saw a different definition of victory. He explained that any army can fight and kill, but an army that chooses to save the enemy, even at great personal risk, demonstrates a moral superiority that transcends tactical victories. He told Mitchell he wanted men in his command who remembered what they were truly fighting for.
Which was more than just territory.
It was the preservation of core human values. Harrison's unexpected decision shielded them from investigation and turned potential disgrace into immediate commendation.
Meanwhile, the nurses spent the next 3 weeks recovering in the American base hospital, and this is where the real war of ideology was waged and lost.
It was a brutal form of psychological warfare waged entirely by kindness. They were treated with the same high standard of care as American soldiers. Warm beds, 3 square meals a day, excellent medical attention to save their frostbitten limbs. And this created an overwhelming cognitive dissonance.
Because they had been taught their entire lives that the enemy was a monster.
A subhuman torture. Yet they were being given life-saving treatment by those same people.
Yuki, the true believer in the imperial cause, must have been in turmoil.
Absolutely. The source material details her internal crisis. Every act of kindness, a nurse bringing fresh sheets, a doctor carefully cleaning a wound, was like a hammer blow to the foundation of her beliefs. The propaganda that had defined her existence, that had led her to face a suicidal path of honor, was collapsing under the weight of simple human decency.
The emotional suppression that kept her sane in the bunker began to fail.
And this crisis climaxed in what the sources call the coffee moment.
Tell us about that.
It is a stunning anecdote. An American nurse named Sarah, who had been meticulously caring for Yuki, brought her a cup of real coffee. This was a luxury, a sensory memory of a world long gone. The rich aroma, the warmth of the mug in her hands. It was an overwhelming sensory experience after 9 months of smoke and snow.
And the moment was too much for her.
It was. Years of suppressed grief, the terror of the capture, the loss of her comrades, all of it just poured out of Yuki in these deep, wrenching sobs.
And Nurse Sarah's reaction defined the interaction. She didn't try to lecture or convert or offer empty reassurances.
No, she simply sat there. She offered silent, unwavering companionship. That singular act of silent presence, their shared moment of warmth and grief between 2 women on opposite sides of the deadliest conflict in history, was more destructive to the imperial ideology than any barrage of bombs. Yuki's heart, which had been hardened by duty and propaganda, just cracked wide open.
And Nurse Ko, who lost 3 toes, was the one who articulated this realization best through a translator, right?
She was. Her words captured the philosophical transformation perfectly. She said, "In Japan, we were told you were monsters. But monsters do not carry their enemies through blizzards. Monsters do not share their coffee. I do not know what you are, but you are not monsters."
The concept of the enemy had shifted.
From an ideological foe to a complex human being.
That is the ultimate success of the rescue. They didn't just save their bodies, they shattered the lies that kept them enemies.
And following that successful rescue, the 4 American soldiers returned to their barracks. They'd survived the physical ordeal, but now they faced the deeper psychological review of their actions. The question remained, did they risk American lives unnecessarily? Did they actually do the right thing?
And Sergeant Davis, the most pragmatic of the group, was the one who provided the defining answer for them all.
Davis's perspective was crucial because he defined their actions as an assertion of their own values. He stated that they did the right thing because if we'd left them, we'd have been no different from the bastards we're fighting.
That's powerful.
He said, what makes us different isn't our guns, it's that we don't leave people to die in the snow, even if they're the enemy, especially if they're the enemy. He framed the act of mercy not as a deviation from duty, but as the truest form of their duty.
And Private Chen's reflection was perhaps the most complex, given his family's history of suffering under Japanese occupation.
Chen's journey was profound. He had every personal reason to let those women die. But saving them was a deeper healing process for him than any act of revenge could ever have been.
He said something like, "Revenge is easy."
He realized. Revenge is easy, forgiveness is hard. By choosing to carry these women, he was choosing to see them as individuals struggling for survival, not as emblems of an occupying force. And that hard choice, he discovered, was what made him fully human and allowed him to start healing his own wartime wounds.
And Kowalski, who had nearly quit in the snow, learned that human goodness isn't always innate. Sometimes it has to be dragged out of you.
He admitted it. His instinct was purely selfish, to leave the collapsed woman and save himself. But he realized that Mitchell made him be better than I wanted to be. And this is a crucial insight. Our better nature isn't always automatic. It often requires an external force, a conscience, a leader, a partner, to remind you of the moral high ground and drag you toward the person you should be, rather than the person fear and exhaustion make you want to be.
Before the nurses were transferred to a POW camp on the mainland, they held a formal, emotional ceremony for the 4 soldiers.
They had nothing material to give, but they offered gifts of immense symbolic value. Tiny, intricately folded origami cranes, created from scraps of medical paper and small driftwood charms they had carved with simple tools. These women, stripped of everything, found a way to express immense gratitude.
And Yuki gave Mitchell a crane and made a promise that transcended the moment.
She did. She told him, "You gave me life. I can never repay, but I will remember always, and I will teach my children about the American soldier who carried me through snow." And both the soldiers and the nurses, they agreed to keep the story quiet for decades.
Why?
The soldiers sought no recognition. They just saw it as doing the right thing. And the nurses, due to the intense cultural shame associated with being a POW in post-war Japan, remained profoundly silent about their experience.
But the promise was not broken. Yuki returned to Japan, restarted her life, and became a nurse again. And she gave her daughter a highly controversial name for a Japanese woman in the 1940s and 50s.
She named her daughter Sarah,
After the American nurse.
after the American nurse who had brought her the coffee and offered silent companionship. This wasn't just a tribute. It was a visible rejection of the old, hateful propaganda and an embrace of the mercy she had been shown. It took her 20 years spent saving money and overcoming deep fear. But in 1965, Yuki traveled to Ohio.
She found Mitchell, now 45, still walking with a slight limp from a separate war wound, living a quiet, modest life as an engineer. What did she say after 2 decades of silence?
After simply confirming that she was the woman he carried through the snow, Yuki revealed the astonishing details she had never told anyone outside her family. In the bunker, they were preparing for ritual mass suicide.
Wow.
They had hoarded a single pistol with 15 bullets for the purpose.
So the rescue literally pulled them away from a pact with death.
Her final words to Mitchell in his kitchen were the culmination of 2 decades of reflection. She said, "You saved us from more than the cold. You showed us that real honor is not in dying for a cause. It is in choosing life, even when life is hard. Mercy is the greatest strength of all." And Mitchell realized that his instantaneous, desperate act of defiance on a frozen island had fundamentally altered the moral course of 15 lives.
It's just amazing this story remained hidden for so long. How did it finally come to light in the 1990s?
The revelation came through the next generation. It was Margaret Chen, Private Chen's granddaughter. She was recording her grandfather's memories for a history project. Chen had always been reluctant to speak about the war, but he finally mentioned, reluctantly, carrying a Japanese nurse through a blizzard.
And she knew it was a big story.
She sensed the magnitude of it, yes.
Yeah.
She tracked down the accounts of the other soldiers and eventually found Yuki's daughter, Sarah, through persistent investigation.
And Sarah confirmed everything through her mother's diary.
She did. Yuki's diary, written in these tiny, precise characters, confirmed every logistical detail, including the custom Yuki maintained every single year, folding 15 paper cranes on February 18th, the anniversary of the rescue. One for each nurse saved.
So the story revealed that one act of kindness, chosen under impossible pressure, could ripple across decades and change the worldview of entire generations.
And the final symbol of this shared humanity stands today on that brutal, remote island.
The monument.
A small monument was erected on Attu, intentionally placed to be simple and universal, carries no flags, no unit markings. It just depicts two figures, one carrying the other through the snow, a symbol of aid, not conquest. And the inscription, plain and profound, reads, "In the midst of war, mercy, in the face of death, life, February 18th, 1944.
A quiet testament to the idea that our humanity is often found in the places we least expect it.
This story is so powerful because it just dissects the fundamental lie that war requires us to believe, the lie of the other. War trains us rigorously to see the enemy as less than human, because that is the only way we can be conditioned to fight and kill them efficiently.
And this incident proves that that training is just a necessary lie.
It is. Beneath the uniforms, beneath the propaganda, that core humanity is just waiting. Mitchell and his men, in the most critical situation, stripped away the ideology and saw only the desperate human need. They chose the vastly more difficult path when every logical, tactical, and survival instinct argued for abandonment.
And that is the core lesson here. Our humanity doesn't disappear in conflict, it waits for us to choose it. They were exhausted, freezing, facing a deadly blizzard, and they made the choice to carry. That choice to show mercy to someone who, by the terms of global war, was defined as deserving only death. That is the highest measure of being fully human.
And we see the enduring weight of that choice in the closing chapters of their lives. Yuki, the nurse, died in 1998, and she was buried with one of those small, fragile paper cranes.
And Mitchell, an old man with trembling hands, traveled across the ocean to attend her funeral in Japan, completing the circle that began in that frozen, smoky bunker 54 years earlier.
He placed his own crane beside hers, clumsily folded, because his hands were stiff with age and pain, but its meaning was absolute.
So the measure of our humanity is not what we do when it's easy or when it's clearly advantageous. It's defined by what we choose when everything argues against it. When circumstances demand we turn away, when fear says quit, or when logic screams abandon, that enduring choice to carry defines us all.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive on Hidden Front history.